So it was June of 1994, and I was at Boys State at Bowling Green State University. And so if you don't know what Boys State is, after your junior year, the Legion, American Legion, gets kids from there all around Ohio. They come together for a couple weeks, and in a couple weeks, they build a whole state government. And you learn all about the state government, and there's, the governors are there, and everybody from around the government's there, and they teach these young men about government, and you have to have a job, and it doesn't sound that fun, but it was a really fun couple weeks. But we did that all through the day, and then we stayed on campus there, and we had these strict rules. We stayed in the dorms. It wasn't a lot for us to do at night, and we weren't allowed to bring TVs into the dorms. I don't know why, but that was the rule. But the NBA Finals were going to be on, okay? Houston Rockets playing the New York Knicks, the first Michael Jordan-less finals in years, and we all wanted to watch. So we smuggled a TV in, and we're all huddled in this dorm room, and there's like 50 of us in one dorm room watching the TV like this big, But the game, now, TV's different now, right? We got all these cable news channels. We got all these different things. The game kept getting interrupted for the news. Most of you are old enough to remember when that used to happen, right? I didn't think the news was more important than the game, but everybody else did. And it kept getting interrupted for a car chase in Los Angeles. And I said, why do we care about a car chase in Los Angeles, right? Everybody remember that car chase? That white Ford Bronco? Jimmy, they might have played that in India when it happened. I don't know. It was that big. That was the start of our cultural obsession with the O.J. Simpson trial, right? And we were glued to our TVs and talked about it for forever, it seemed like. And that wasn't the first time that it happened. In our history, we've had many trials like that, going all the way back to things like the Black Dahlia murders or the Lindbergh baby. And then more recent things, the Menendez brothers who've been back in the news, right? Scott Peterson or all these different people that they talk about obsessively about these murder trials, and we obsess with it. And I think that what we should realize from that is this. Murder is a part of our daily lives. Now, you may not feel like that's true. You might feel like, I don't see people murdered on a daily basis, right? It's not something I experience all the time. They've done studies. Here's what the studies show. By the time our children in America turn 18, they've seen 200,000 acts of violence and 40,000 murders. That's over 6 a day. So when I say murder is an everyday experience for us, it is. It's a part of our culture. We have bred it into ourselves. And in spite of the fact that every culture ever has had laws against murder, it's still this prevalent part of our everyday lives. And nearly everyone we know will say that they've never murdered anybody. And probably most of us may not have known people that have been murdered. Like, that's not something, if you're fortunate that that's ever been a part of your life, and yet it's still there. And so sometimes we get to this sixth commandment in Exodus 20:13. It's the verse today. There it is. You must not murder. That's it. It's 2 words in Hebrew. That's it. That's the whole verse. And we think, I've got this one covered, right? Of all the 10 commandments, like this one, if I'm going to go down the list, this is the first one I'm going to check off. And here's our problem. We talked about this originally, that we look at these as commandments, right? So, and we talked about them, the Bible never uses that word. That's the word that we use. We'll call them the 10 Commandments. And we look at them as if they are standards of righteousness. This is the measure of whether I'm a good person or not. I'm going to go down this list of 10 things, and if I manage to do or not do these things, I'm a good person. And so we get in our heads, if I manage to get through the day without murdering the people in my life, I must be a good person. And some days that's a bigger challenge than others, am I right? But I want you to hear this. When we switch and we stop talking about them as commandments and start realizing that God is saying these are your commitments. These are your commitments in a covenant relationship with the God of the universe. This is far more than what I do or don't do. It becomes so much bigger than that. And what we're going to see is this is not just God saying, please manage not to kill each other. It shows us that God values life. He gave us life. He created our lives, and he wants us to value that life. So when we look at this commandment today, we're going to go far deeper than talking about what murder is or murder isn't, and what it means to value life the way that God has called us to value each other's lives. And that gets us to the heart of the commitment that we make in our covenant relationship with our God. So we ask this question every time, what is the commandment? We can go back one where I fooled you, Linda. What is the commandment? Simple. You must not murder. Again, 2 words. Just say don't kill. That's what it means literally in Hebrew. Don't kill. So we use different terminology in our legal system. Murder, manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter. We got all these different terminologies, right? This term covers them all. They just got one word. And literally, this is the forbidding of taking life. And it doesn't really even say human life, does it? We assume that, but it doesn't say that. It just don't kill. Now, when we then expand, all right, we go out from there, and we read in Deuteronomy. Remember, each week we're looking at Deuteronomy, how Moses explains these commitments a little more, and he adds some flesh to them. Well, then he starts to talk about things like, well, animals aren't a part of this, and that it's okay to kill animals. And then he talks about how soldiers at war, in a righteous war, that this isn't a part of it. That self-defense, defending your own life isn't a part of it. Or the legal consequences for someone. Death penalty in their culture, not a part of this. So there are some, while this is a word that covers everything, then Moses expands and says there are some instances where God sees that there's an allowance here. But for us, what we have to step back and say is, the commandment is simply, killing should not be a part of our lives. No one has the right to end someone else's life, not of their own accord. When it's part of some of these things that we talk about, a legal system, or you're in the military, there's some exceptions there that the grace of God covers, but by and large, our rule is let's not kill each other, okay? That part we can understand. Now, second question we ask is, what does that teach us about God? All of these covenant commitments are mutual commitments. They tell us something about that God and his end of the commitment. He's one end of the covenant, we're the other end. So what does it tell us about him and who he is in his covenant relationship? Well, it tells us 2 simple things. One, it reminds us that God gives us life. In Deuteronomy 32:39, God expressly says, I'm the one who gives life and I'm the one who takes life away. I remember my mother also saying that when I was young, but it wasn't her. It's God. God expressly says it, okay? He and he alone gives us life. He and he alone holds our lives in his hands. So Jesus tells us he's the Lord of life. He's the author. He's the sustainer of life. God gives us life. Second, it reminds us that God has created us in his image. That when God created humanity, it tells us that he put his image in us. And we talk about DNA and people passing DNA along, in their heritage. It's kind of like that God has given us his DNA. There's something about God that's a part of all of us. The sin has changed that in us, right, and corrupted that in us. And yet still, that image of God is within all of us. And so when we take life, we are violating the image of God. We're destroying that part of a person and that part of God's creation. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to him. So here's here's where we get to the big question. What does this mean for me? Because we want it to just mean, let's not kill each other, close the book, and walk away. But it means a lot more than that. Number one, it means that every single life is equally valuable. Every life comes from God. Every life is given by God. Every life is sustained by God. Every life contains the image of God, so every life is valuable. And we might think, listen, the culture that we live in wants you to believe that that's their value. It is not. I want to read to you a quote from a respected medical professional. And listen to these words. We can no longer base our ethics, medical ethics, on the idea that human beings are a special form of creation made in the image of God, singled out from all other animals and alone possessing an immortal soul. Once this religious mumbo-jumbo has been stripped away, we may continue seeing normal members of our species as possessing greater capacities of rationality, self-consciousness, communication, etc., than other members of our species. But we will not regard as sacrosanct the life of each and every member of our species. And so, if you didn't catch that, what they said is this. Once we get past this foolish idea that the image of God is in everybody, then we don't have to value everyone the same way. We can say some of us are better than others, and some of our lives are more valuable than others. And so we don't have to look at everyone as equally valuable. And so while we live in a culture that uses words like tolerance to make you believe that they value everyone the same way, that is not a cultural value. That is a kingdom of God value. And our culture does not value us all the same way. And so what that means for us is there's these foundational scientific beliefs that allow cultures in our world to cause and justify homicide and suicide and assisted suicide and abortion and infanticide and genocide and terrorism and the constant wars that we're bombarded with because they don't value human life. We have so many names for the things that God had one word for because we have devalued human life and because we don't value it the way that He did. The number of names we have for it shows that we don't see every life as equally valuable. We justified violence. We have justified the taking of life in the name of our convenience. We come up with standards that are just made up almost out of thin air. If you remember the genocide in Rwanda, right, in the 90s. The Hutu and the Tutsis. Do you know the difference between the two? In the 1920s, when Belgium colonized them, they separated them into two different groups. And they used things like their height and the size of their nose to differentiate between the two of them. That's what's different about them. And so everybody's told them, you're different, and this group's more valuable than this group. Those are made up standards. Those are just human standards that somebody pulled out of thin air. That's what we use to differentiate who's better than others. Because the standard that God has created in us is that we are all equally valuable in the eyes of God. And so that causes us to hear politicians talk about murder rates, and we don't see the faces of the children in Chicago whose lives are ruined by it. It causes us to watch the endless wars on the news. And we don't have to look at the people whose homes were destroyed by those bombs. And it causes us to hear all of these different things, and we don't have to see the faces of the people that are there. And we think we care about these things. The only wars that you know about are the ones that our politicians care about. And there's lives that are taken every day that you have no awareness of. How many of you heard of Myanmar, Burma? Right? Do you know they've been at war for almost 80 years? 80 years they've been at civil war. How many times on the evening news? As millions of people are displaced. And the battle continues with no end in sight because it doesn't matter to us. Genocide. I mean, genocide would make the news, right? We would care if somebody was trying to wipe an entire race of people out. Well, in Myanmar, Buddhism is the dominant religion, and they are militant. So they persecute other faiths. And so if you look up, about Christians, we hear that Christians are persecuted in Myanmar all the time. It's, every map you look up from persecuted, that matters to us. We care about that. But the Rohingya people, there's a genocide that's happening there in the midst of this civil war. We never talk about them. You don't hear about them. You don't know about them. Do you know why? Because they're Muslim. And so, in essence, people think they don't matter as much to us. We don't care about them. But fundamentally, what God has said to us is their lives matter just as much as ours. That even the people who are enemies, who fight against us, who are different than us, that their lives are as valuable as ours. And that this commitment that we're making to God is saying, I'm going to recognize and realize that every single life has been given by God, is sustained by God, was created in the image of God, even if they do wrong things or are wrong about everything. They're as valuable as me or anyone else. That's the fundamental kingdom truth. So here's what it means. Here's the second thing that it means for me. If that's true, if every life is equally valuable, and we can agree, like this big picture, sure, yes, that's true, then you and I should treat everyone as equally valuable. It should not just be a standard that we say, yes, we believe in it, but it should affect how I live towards the people in my life. It should affect how I act towards them, how I speak towards them. Do you treat every life? Now, I want to be very careful. Do you treat every life as valuable? For us to say that we have to treat every life in our lives as equally valuable is not what God is really saying. I'll give you an example. How many of you have kids? I care more about my kids than your kids. Their lives mean more to me than your kids' lives do. I love your kids, even if I don't know them, right? But because of my relationship with my children, they are more valuable to me. But their lives are not more valuable than your children's lives, right? So because of that, I should treat your children as valuable. So the word equally, we have to be very careful. Because God has put people in our lives that we're going to value more because of our relationship, because of commonalities, because of the things that are true in our lives. But we have to recognize that because they're in my life doesn't mean they're more important than these other people. They're equally valuable in God's eyes, even if our relational exchange means they're more valuable to me. But so I should treat your children in a certain type of way because I recognize they're valuable. Even if at the same time I recognize the value on my children might be different because of that relationship. God doesn't tell us anywhere that we have to like everyone. It's not a commandment. It's not a commitment. We don't have to like everybody. But the fact that somebody's annoying doesn't mean you can't value their life. Or doesn't mean that you should treat them any differently. There are things that we may disagree on. There's things that we may not like about each other. And God says that's okay. You got to love each other anyways. And you got to treat them the way that I've treated you. You got to value them the way that I valued you. You have to recognize their life is valuable. If it's valuable to God, it should be valuable to you. If you believe that life is a gift from God and that life is valuable, then you have to believe that every life is valuable, and that belief should impact how you live towards every life. The third thing it means for us is this. Hatred is the root of the culture of death that we live in. And this, I think this is very important for us today. Because the emotions attached on the other end of this, the emotions attached to murder in our hearts are things like anger and hatred. Hatred breeds the devaluing of life. And we have generational hatreds that we pass on. We have things that we've had inbred in us. So many people hate the people they hate because their parents hated them and their parents hated them. It's been passed on, right? We can recognize that. Every culture has that. It's not like an American thing. That's a human thing, right? We see it around the world. And so we see differences and we see distinctions, and sinfully we react with hatred. And we are being called to look past that. We often don't even know why we might hate a particular person. We just know somebody told us we're supposed to. We've almost been fooled into it. But that hatred fills our heart, and then it makes us not value. And that's what leads to death. Just take our... I'm not saying anybody here has done either of these things, okay? But I heard both of these things. We had two presidential candidates. One, we had an assassination attempt who people lamented that it wasn't successful. Correct? Why? Because there was a hatred there. There was a devaluing of life there. And then we had a former president who has cancer and people celebrated it. A devaluing of life based on these differences because we've bred hatred in our hearts towards people that caused us to devalue those lives. And that's what God is saying is wrong. The things that we may disagree with that maybe led to those feelings, we may be completely right about, but allowing them to change our hearts and how we see those people is where we become wrong. So that leads us to the last one. If hatred is what causes it, we have to find unity to see value in life. It's when we begin to see our commonalities that we begin to value each other. But the world we live in says you're different and you believe different things. And if you believe different things, you have to hate each other. And we just have, especially in America, these two extremes just yelling at each other all of the time. And we forget all the things that we share in common. No, we have it here. I can't even imagine, being in India with Jimmy. And how many people are told because they're different, right? Because they're lower, that they're not worth anything. You live in a caste system that's completely different than what we experience, but yet it's the same thing. It breeds hatred. And until they begin to see that we're not different, we're the same, let's see what we hold in common and emphasize that's the only time we'll ever really, truly value life. As long as we value hatred, we'll continue down the path that we're on. And until we all come together and see that I'm not even talking about politics, I'm talking about humanity. I'm talking about churches. I'm talking about families. We allow these differences to divide us and build hate. When God is saying, come together with what brings you together, the commonalities, the things that I've given all of you and created in all of you. We can't allow the things that we don't like about each other to cause us to treat each other differently, right? I can't look at John down here in the front and say, I don't like John's mustache. And so because John's mustache annoys me, and I got to look at it in the front row every week. And I hate that mustache. I'm not gonna talk to John and treat him the same way, right? I can't do that. Instead, I can say, like, I may not like John's mustache. I may not like mustaches in general, but I still have to love John, right? Yeah. Your mustache is great. I love it. As long as we focus on what's different. I can't grow a mustache, so that's what it is, John. We got a difference there. I got to focus on what we have in common, right? That'll bring us together. Until we change that and shift that focus, we're going to continue to breed this culture that we live in all around the world. Now, we read the first commandment, and we came in and said, well, that's easy. I cannot murder somebody today. Now, our next question, our last question, is how does this point us to Jesus? And Jesus talked about this commandment. And what Jesus has to say to us is going to change this commandment from being one that's super easy to follow to being one that's going to feel a lot harder. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, Matthew chapter 5, you have heard that our ancestors were told, you must not murder. If you commit murder, you are subject to judgment. But I say to you, if you are angry with someone, you are subject to judgment. If you call someone an idiot, you are in danger of being brought before the court. If you curse someone, you are in danger of the fires of hell. So if you are presenting a sacrifice at the altar in the temple, and you suddenly remember that someone has something against you, leave your sacrifice there at the altar. Go and be reconciled to that person. Then come and offer your sacrifice to God. When you are on the way to court with your adversary, settle your differences quickly. Otherwise, your accuser may hand you over to the judge, who will hand you over to an officer, and you will be thrown into prison. And if that happens, you surely won't be free again until you've paid the last penny. Jesus explicitly says it's not enough anymore to manage to not kill each other. You have to not have hatred in your hearts. And if you have hatred in your hearts, you are guilty of murder. That's what Jesus says. And then he says this, listen, if that part's not hard enough, because I've called people idiots before, right? I said earlier I had children, right? Jesus then says this, if you want to come to me and you want to come into my presence and you want to talk to me and you want to hear from me and there's somebody in your life that you've got a broken relationship with, you better go fix that before you talk to me. Because you're not going to be able to hear from me. How can you be filled with the love of Jesus if your heart is filled with hatred? How can we be filled with the love of Jesus and our sins be wiped from our hearts if we don't let go of the sins that others have committed against us? How can we embrace His joy if we're filled with anger? The answer is you cannot. And so this isn't some kind of threat where Jesus says you better get it right. Jesus is saying, I want you to be with me and I want you to know who I am and I want you to experience it. So you've got to see the value in each other. And there's people that are going to hurt you. And there's people that are going to take advantage of you. And there's people that you're not going to get along with and not like very much. And you better love them anyways. And you better forgive them anyways. And you better let go of that anger and hatred anyways. Because when you empty your hearts of those things, then you can be filled with an abundance of what I have for you. Jesus knows it's not just about what we manage to not do with our hands. It's about what we fill our hearts with. And when we fill our hearts with the hatred of this world, we cannot be filled with the love of Jesus. And until we let go of that, we can't fully know the love He has for us. Even though He's trying very hard to get you to see how valuable you are to Him. And He's trying to get you to see how valuable you are to Him by getting you to see the people in your lives the way that he sees you. Because we've messed up with him, haven't we? And we've hurt him. And we've abandoned him. And yet there is no hatred in his heart towards us. Only love. And now he's calling us to have that with each other. It's a story from the 1930s, 1931, about a young man named Francis Crawley. He's 18 years old. And at 18, he gained national attention because he went on a 3-month crime spree. He became known as Two-Gun Crawley because during a bank robbery, he shot a real estate agent there with 2 guns. It was a really creative nickname. And so he goes on this crime spree. He's literally partially responsible for the attempted murder of hundreds of policemen. And finally, they catch him. He's in New York. He's in this big shootout. And he gets shot a number of times and finally gives himself up. It is, apparently things work extra different. He was executed within like 3 weeks. The trial, the jail, the execution, all happened like that. When they arrested him, the police do what they're supposed to do. They confiscated everything he had, right? Took it all, put it in evidence. Inside of his coat, he had a note. And he had that note in his pocket. It was like his last words. He knew he was probably going to die at some point, and he wanted these words to be read. Now, what words do you think that a multi-time murderer gone on a crime spree would say about himself? Listen to this. Under my coat is a weary heart, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm. What? He's killed multiple people. Would have continued to until he got stopped. And his last words are that he has a kind heart and wouldn't do anybody any harm. You see, friends, like Francis Crowley, we have deceived ourselves into believing that we could never have the kind of hateful heart that Jesus is talking about. I mean, here's this young man who willfully, deliberately broke this commandment we talked about and then said, I wouldn't hurt a fly. You might say the same thing. I would never break that commandment. I would never hurt anybody. And yet, we are guilty of the same kind of hatred and anger that leads to people doing those kind of things. Beyond that, it's up the ante. It's not even about what we do, it's about what we don't do. Right? I was just reading this morning. So this isn't even in my sermon. I was just reading Proverbs this morning, Proverbs 24. And listen to this. Solomon writes, rescue those who are unjustly sentenced to die. This is Proverbs 24, 11, and 12. Rescue those who are unjustly sentenced to die. Save them as they stagger to their death. Don't excuse yourself by saying, look, we didn't know, for God understands all hearts and he sees you. In the Proverbs, they say, if you see somebody, and this is a particular situation, but if you see somebody whose life is being unjustly taken and you do nothing about it, you are guilty. The lack of action is as guilty as the action. It's not just about what we do, it's about what we don't do. So I'm going to challenge you with this thought as we end today. I'll ask Blake and David, you guys can come up to get ready. We're going to sing the song, Build My Life. It talks about how we're building our life on the love of Jesus. That's what's going to lead us away from this hate. That's what's going to lead us to valuing each other. But listen to what Martin Luther says about the sixth commandment. This commandment is violated not only when a person actually does evil, but also when he fails to do good to his neighbor. Or though he has the opportunity, fails to prevent, protect, and save him from suffering bodily harm or injury. If you send a person away naked when you could clothe him, you have let him freeze to death. If you have let anyone suffer hunger and did not feed him, you have let him starve. Likewise, if you see anyone condemned to death or in similar peril and do not save him, although you know ways and means to do so, you have killed him. It will do you no good to plead that you did not contribute to his death by word and deed, for you have withheld your love from him and robbed him of the service by which his life might have been saved. Have we withheld our love from people? Sometimes for the wrong reasons, because of what they look like, because of what they've said, because of what they've done. Sometimes because we're just complacent and too self-centered to think about others. There's all kind of reasons we do it, but I want to challenge you today as we sing the song to let the Holy Spirit speak to your hearts and to hear those ways that you can show the lives around you the value that God has given them. The value that God has put in them. Because listen, there's some of you here today who are you're sitting here and you're saying, you don't know you're valuable. You don't recognize the value that God has given you. And here, God says this: by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not by your own doing. This is a gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. We're all equal in this, right? We are all equally terrible sinners, all equally in need of the grace of Jesus Christ. For you are his masterpiece, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in him. Your life is the masterpiece of God's creation. That's the value that he gave you. He gave you the capacity to love as Jesus did. And so we are called to go paint that masterpiece in the world every single day of our lives. That everyone might know that there's a God who created them, who values them, who loves them, and now wants to recreate them in his image. Let the song be our prayer today, that our lives would be built on the love of Jesus Christ and not the hatred of this world.